Hello, this recording provides a brief introduction to economics of the environment, and basically it's providing some context for you. So you might have heard of Malthus. So Malthus, around, well, as you can see, 1798, he predicted we would eventually starve. And he came up with this idea of the law of diminishing returns. So the point he was making was that as our population grew, we would rapidly start using up the world's resources, and eventually the population would outstrip food supply. This has formed the basis of quite a bit of thinking around this. But of course, we've not already starved. So, in order to understand, why has that not come to be, a number of factors can be taken into account. I mean, first of all, we've been very good at technological innovation. In fact, human beings are very good at innovating and coping with things. And so we've developed new technologies to enable us to cope with things. And one of the things that's happened, because certain resources have got scarce, they've actually risen in costs. And so therefore we use them less, or we get very good at extracting them from products when products have come to the end of their life cycle. So essentially we developed alternatives. Now, a good example there is UK energy supply, which used to be dominated by fossil fuels like coal and gas. And in 2019, for the first time, 50% of UK energy was generated by renewable supplies. So, we've made quite a big step forwards there in quite a short period of time. So you can sort of see how we begin to cope with some of these things, mainly through technological innovation and then scarcity of resources. But then there's also been public opinion. So there's been quite a lot of pressure on industry to do things. And we've seen this particularly in the events industry over the last couple of years. So another thing to think about here is what's known as the tragedy of the commons, and you'll see at the bottom of the slide it's also known as game theory and the prisoner's dilemma. So you may have come across this in other kinds of settings. So, the point here is this idea that the environment is a shared resource. It's not something that really should be just owned by a number of individuals. And things like fresh air, clean water, they're a shared resource. But the problem is that if we all act in our self-interest, instead of acting for the common good, we deplete these resources and we potentially ruin them from other people. So, we are very good at exploiting the environment. It could be for its amenity value, for holidays, tourism, for having events in lovely settings. We extract resources from it, we dump our waste there. But at the same time, we want a good environment. So there's all sorts of questions about who pays the cost. Who pays the cost for cleaning up afterwards, or for greener products and services, which at the moment tend to cost more. So, for example, in the context of, say, a festival, which is probably the easiest example to give, people decide to leave waste at a festival, and obviously that needs to be cleaned up. Now, ultimately, that cost will likely to come back to consumers because the event organisers of a big festival are going to have to factor that in their ticket price. But then they've also got to then dispose of that waste somewhere. And that's when we have these problems like plastic waste being sent to Indonesia and causing pollution there. So there are all sorts of interesting challenges. It's not just that initial cost of cleaning up that site, but where it goes afterwards. This is seen as a market failure because there's in the way that markets operate, there's quite a lot of self-interest in there. And we also see a lot of intergenerational problems. So in terms of, how you actually manage, for instance, plastic waste in the ocean long term. And I've also mentioned there nuclear energy. So, we draw on nuclear energy now for, quite a bit of our electricity supply, but it has long-term implications. And recently I was sent an invite to a meeting set, I think, 300 years in the future. So pretty optimistic that I'll still be alive, but about, to have a meeting about what to do with the decommissioned Doonway nuclear power site, because that's when it will actually be usable again for some other form of use, whereas at the moment it will be a dead site during that entire period. So, we look at things like greenhouse gas emissions. So I say GH, shorten that to GHG in the slide. Overall the world would benefit from a reduction of those. But from an individual point of view, it's better if everybody else cuts the emissions. rather than you yourself. But if no one cuts emissions, everyone loses. So, this is a problem which you see in the background here and is looked at by economists. So, if we look at the relationship between the economy and the environment, you can see that the economy, takes things from the environment. So it draws on the environment for health and immunity, for raw materials, and that feeds into the kind of production and consumption. But then waste is put back into the environment. And you can sort of see a problem there because, the environment can't go on forever like that. So that's why there's this problem, and there is a whole discipline of economics of the environment looking at this. So, in terms of event management, as I said earlier, the music festivals are a really good example of the kind of problem here. So they are quite resource intensive, as you can see from the photograph of the car parking area. I'm not sure which festival that is. It might be Boomtown, actually. So a lot of people drive to events, and events in most cases are often places that actually pull people in from much wider areas. So there's travel to events, and travel has various impacts associated with it. And then, of course, you've got the waste after a festival. Now, also, though, we are seeing festivals take action. So on the right-hand side there, you can see at the top, and I'm no doubt you're aware that Glastonbury banned plastic bottles. They couldn't be sold at the festival in 2019. People had to refill bottles to sort of try to reduce some of that waste. And at the bottom there, I'm pretty sure that picture comes from Boomtown. And Boomtown Festival really had a big push at trying to get people to take home their tents after the festivals, and it's quite a significant fact there, 250,000 abandoned tents. So you can sort of see the kind of problems there, because there's a cost of clearing up all that waste afterwards that will be a cost for the event, and that will be transferred to consumers. But also there's this wider cost of what do you do with that waste once you've collected it? Where does that go? And that's often had significant implications in developing countries. Okay, so you now ought to go and look at a couple of the other videos in this topic area, which are on sustainable development and then the market-based and non-market-based approaches to tackling this.